Hey guys, today's video is all about what it's like to live in a tiny house in the winter. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we get cold, snowy winters, which we all kind of love and hate at the same time. We got about 3 or 4 inches of snow overnight, and I am headed out to clear it and clean off my car because I need to run some errands later. One thing I do miss about my old townhouse condo was a garage, so I didn't have to clear the snow, and having people to come and clean the snow for me. But I love my parking spot, I love my tiny house, and I keep telling myself it's good exercise. So anyways, I'm gonna do that, and then we'll go inside and we'll talk a little bit more about what I've learned about living in a tiny house this winter so far. So stay tuned. I'm glad that's over. So today I want to talk about what it's like to live in a tiny house in the winter. I've been here since June of last year, and this is my first winter here. The video was requested, and at first, while I think it's a great idea, at first I wondered if I had enough information because I haven't been here a full year. But I think it's good to get an update, and then I can always do a recap at the end of winter. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we have cold and snowy winters, some years colder than others. And we have had some pretty cold days this year so far, and I've had to learn how the tiny house works in that kind of weather. So just for some reference, a few weeks ago, I got my notes. A few weeks ago, we had Celsius minus 30 for about a week, maybe just over that. In Fahrenheit, that is minus 22 in Fahrenheit. So it was cold, very cold. And that was during the day. With the wind chill, you could add another negative 5 degrees. At night, it got down to minus 38, minus 40 Celsius, which is minus 36 Fahrenheit. Pretty freaking cold. So far, the house has done really well in the winter. I've had no problem with the furnace. I've been able to keep a nice cozy temperature in the house, and that has been great because it is an RV size furnace for my house, and I didn't know how it would do being on pretty much, well, fairly steadily. At night while I'm sleeping, I like it nice and cool, so I usually take it down to 15 degrees in here at night. During the day, if I'm working from home during the day, I usually have it at 18 degrees-ish, depending on whether I'm having a hot flash or not. The thing is, every furnace makes a little noise when it's on. You're just usually not sleeping next to your furnace. It does make some noise, and you do hear it. I don't think it makes any more or less noise than any furnace in a regular house. It just happens to be that I'm sleeping really close to it. So it is just something to note when you're designing your house, where you put your furnace. You might want to keep that in mind. I don't know that there was a lot of options for where the furnace went in the design of my house. So, but it's not super loud. It's basically white noise when it comes on. I don't mind it, and I don't have it come on that often at night. But that week that we had those freezing cold temperatures, it was on fairly regularly. Still didn't bother me. I'd rather be warm. So keep in mind that that's one thing that I sort of became aware of this winter in my tiny house, was the fact that the furnace, you can hear it when it comes on. And it took a little getting used to, and now I don't notice it at all. A few weeks ago, I had a lovely lady named Agnes. Hi, Agnes. Come and see the tiny house, and she asked me a question about moisture in the windows during our cold snap. I did have a little bit of moisture in the corners of each of the windows, but then again, so did everybody else. It was just that cold outside that you were going to have a little condensation on your windows. I certainly didn't have any more than anybody else. You know, any of my friends who live in a standard size house, they all had a little bit of frost or condensation on their windows, and so did I. Didn't last, and it was not a whole lot. I think that the Lunos air exchanger really makes a difference in keeping the moisture down, but there was some. And so yeah, again, nothing happened that wouldn't have happened if I had still been in my townhouse, or if I had been in a full-size conventional size house. That was something that everybody experienced because it was just so cold. You may be wondering how cold the floors are, because of course I'm in a tiny house on wheels on a custom built trailer built by, I think it's CJ Trailers in Manitoba, and they specifically build trailers for tiny homes. So was my floor colder than it would have been in a standard size house? Honestly, I wear slippers, but in the morning when I get up and I'm out of bed and I step on the floor, it actually isn't that cold. My bedroom's over the gooseneck is shedded in, and that may have had something to do with it, but I also think that the floor is so well insulated. It's spray foam insulation in the floor, and then the underneath of the trailer is sheathed in with metal sheathing, so it keeps the floor nice and well insulated. Also, I have my tiny house skirted in, and that also keeps it warmer in here. Remember, when you're skirting in your tiny house, to put ventilation in your skirting. I have vents on either side of my tiny house, and also in the shed I have it open inside the shed into the underneath of the tiny house, just to have a little extra air circulation. That's also really important, because if you don't put proper ventilation in, you can have a moisture problem underneath there. But again, the house is so well insulated with the spray foam insulation and the sheathing underneath that when I do walk around in bare feet, even in the main part of the house, it's no chillier than it would have been in a regular house. I'm always very cozy. That hasn't been an issue, but in case you're wondering, I think if you make sure that your home is well insulated and properly skirted in, you shouldn't have any problem. So the question that you may be wondering, and that I have been asked, is what about your pipes freeze when we had the cold spell? And actually, I did have a pipe freeze on me, but I'll explain the situation. So most standard built houses, and I'm not an electrician, this is just from the research I've done and the knowledge of my house, most foundation built houses in Canada are 100 amp service. My tiny house has 50 amp service, which is really just means there's fewer breakers, and it doesn't need 100 amp service because there's just not that much in here that's electrical that would be going at the same time. One of the things that, because I don't have a garage, I have my car parked outside, as you saw, and it's pretty frosty, especially that week. And so in Canada, in cold areas, and in the US and across the world, we have block heaters in our cars. That week, I did have my car plugged in. The outside plugs in the house are on their own breaker, their own circuit. There are 3 plugs outside the house, and one of them is just outside the front door. That's where the extension cord for the car plug-in is. I also have one string of Christmas lights still up on my tree. They're LED lights. They draw like 3 amps, so nothing. But the car is plugged in there. There is a plug-in underneath the gooseneck in the shed part where I have a trouble light plugged in, and so it's LED. And so when I go in there at night, I can see what's going on. And then the third plug-in is underneath the trailer, and it is where the heat trace tape is plugged in. The heat trace is wrapped around all of the plumbing piping underneath the trailer, and it keeps the pipes from freezing. There's a switch inside the house here that you switch on when it gets cold enough to have it on, and I had it on. So I wasn't anticipating there being a problem, but what happened was I blew a breaker outside. I had the car plugged in. It was the only thing plugged in on that circuit. And from what I understand, each circuit is 15 amps. And a car block heater draws about 10 amps. This is as per my father-in-law, who is knowledgeable in all those things. So I don't know why I blew a breaker, and I didn't know I had blown one, and it hasn't happened since. So something happened. I don't know, there might have been electrical surge or something like that, but I blew a breaker outside, that specific breaker outside. So the heat trace was no longer on. I did not notice it until the next morning when I woke up, and I noticed that the Christmas lights weren't on in the tree outside my window, and it's still dark, so they should have been on. So that was my first clue. Then I went into the bathroom and I turned the tap on, and there was no water, which was a bummer. So I had blown the breaker, and I knew that I had to reset the breaker. I went into my closet in my bedroom. The electrical panel is in there, and it's very well labeled, and I could see the breaker for the outside plugs and for the heat trace tape. And I reset it, but it didn't come back on. So what I didn't realize, and I figured out with some help from some friends who are knowledgeable, was that there is a reset button on the plug-in outside, not the one by the door, but the one underneath the gooseneck. I had to figure that out, put my headlamp on, and I went out there, and I found the plug-in that had the reset button on it. I'm grateful that the reset button wasn't on the plug-in for the heat trace tape, but obviously the builder knows what they're doing. And so as soon as I pressed the reset button, everything came back on. But of course, the line was still frozen to the bathroom, and I didn't know how frozen, and I didn't know how bad that was going to be. I left the taps on, and I got in my car and drove over to the Tim Hortons to get a coffee, because I really needed a coffee. And by the time I got back, so 20 minutes later, the water was running. So it had just frozen, and it was not a problem from that point forward. But that was a real learning experience for me. So from that point forward, I just made sure that when I went to bed, the Christmas lights were on. When I woke up, the Christmas lights were on, and I just kept an eye on it. I didn't have the problem again, and I still haven't figured out why that circuit tripped. It's on its own circuit. The only thing that was plugged in was the car. So I think it was just a freak thing. It's not been a problem since, but I'm just aware of it. So yes, I had a water line freeze, but I'm not the only one who's had water lines freeze in that cold weather. It happens. It happened here. It was a learning experience. I don't think it was unique to the trailer. I think it was, or the tiny house, I think it was just the temperature and the combination of events that led up to that circuit tripping. Now I know. I keep an eye on it. I know if it ever does trip, that not only do I need to reset the breaker inside, I have to go outside to the plug-in under the gooseneck and reset that plug, and then everything will be fine. Other than that, I don't think living in the tiny house in the winter is any different than living in my townhouse when I was there. It's cozy. I feel very warm in here. I think because I have so many windows and we get a lot of sunlight, so I never feel closed in. It never feels claustrophobic, but I think that has a lot to do with the design. Also, my home is wider than standard, so at 9.5 feet, almost 10 feet wide, it feels more open. And in the living room here, I don't have a loft above me, so I have a feeling of a lot of space. It feels very cozy and warm and snug, and I like that. I think if you've designed your tiny house well and it feels comfortable to you, then it'll be the same. So that is my experience so far being in my tiny house in the winter. I love it here. I love, love, love it here. People are always asking me how I'm doing in the cold weather in my tiny house. The same as they are. It's no different. It's not like I'm in a tent or a yurt. It's a house. It just happens to be on a custom built trailer. And if you've done your design properly and you've made sure to use a good builder who knows what they're doing, for building tiny houses for cold weather, cold climates. It will be insulated properly and you will be just as cozy as everybody else. So far, so good. I'll let you know when springtime comes what the winter was like. So that's the video. If you have any questions or are curious about things that I haven't addressed in this video, I would love for you to put your comments down below and your questions down below. Also, please subscribe. I would really love for you to subscribe and comment and share the videos with somebody you think might like. Let me know if you live in a tiny house and what your experiences are, and I will see you next week. Thanks.